Hey everybody, Father Silouan on WAWTAR. That's my old pal, a monk in the Orthodox Church. He's in Rockport on Long Island. He's a painter, kind of world famous kind of painter. He's a good dude. He's actually my godson. He's also a Puerto Rican monk in the Orthodox Church under the Russians. Figure that out. But most of all, today he's a defender of modernity. Our podcast does a lot of hammering away at people like Uncle Seth, who's coming on soon, to modern, nice people who I think have imbibed some bad modern medicine. Today, we'd hear from a monk who says, hey, slow down, John. There might be more to this, and we should probably give thanks. And Father Silouan is the deliverer of some good news, I think, on WAWTAR. Father Silouan, you are back. I think you're the third time on our WAWTAR.
I guess,
Third time.
I think so. You know, patchy,
I'm wearing a
patchy. Hat. I like your hat. Where's that? I bet you that's from Georgia.
Georgian Republic.
Yeah, it's nice.
Not necessarily a monk's hat, but they might wear this.
I actually have one of those black, with a cross design on the top.
Yeah, this one doesn't have a cross. I've seen guys just sport this around. But yeah, I thought I'd wear it in homage.
Yeah, it's great, man.
Because
you got a hat friend. Too, man, right here, man.
I know, I see it. So, do you guys in the monastery have to wear a hat?
It's the tradition to wear a hat, but it is not. We don't have we don't police people if they don't wear it in the house. But normally for the services, yes, a skufia or a klobuk, depending on your rank. If you're a simple monk, if you haven't been made a Rasifor monk, which is the first stage of monasticism in the Russian tradition, because it's divided into three parts: Rasifor, small schema, and schema. If you're not a Rasifor, then you would have a skufia. If you're a Rasifor, you would have the hard hat with the veil, klobuk, they call it.
So they don't give you police powers and like an arm badge to go around and bust people with hats.
Our abbot is quite reasonable, so he doesn't go around with a stick telling people wear your hat. So.
You see what I did there though? I did like a Hollywood sort of an impressionistic as a young man impression from my youth of monks, which is not fair.
Nah.
But I threw that at you. You want to talk about something more serious?
Yeah, well, that's serious too, but that image sort of like relates to our topic that I think you want to bring up, which is a dicey topic. Is the wanting
Guys,
to go ahead. You
ready?
Yeah.
So let's just introduce our idea.
Okay. What's your idea?
Well, I don't say we got into an argument, but we were working it out last time over the phone. And here it is. In general, people who generally like lots of the sort of Orthodox underbrush known as the interwebs, they sort of like this idea that I truck in a lot, which is there's an East and a West, there's an old and a new. And you were telling me, yeah, bro, like, go slow, man. The West might have more to say than you think. And I realized we should talk about that, but we don't have an answer.
I think that's the primary thing that I would put out there as the cautionary note that my fear, which ties into what you're saying directly, is the attempt to arrive at simplistic, too general formulas of dichotomies and narratives of interpretation, distinctions that we make about New World, Old World, East and West, about the evils of Western civilization as compared to whatever it is we think has not perpetrated the same evils or whatever. And I think the tricky thing is that there are critiques that are legitimate critiques, you know. As Orthodox Christians, we have specific values. You know, our primary way of assessing things should be the gospel, and so that will hopefully, by definition, bring us to some awareness, some discernment of what we perceive to be behavior that is not the ideal or behavior as that we should be conducting as human beings. And
so there's
and
a standard.
Yeah, there's a standard, and then that then the question is whether or not that standard is reflected in a culture or a civilization or whatever.
So, but do you believe there is? Would you say there's a contour? Something is there something, a contour around which we'd call New World or modern or Western? Is there such a thing in your mind?
Yes, I mean, everybody, I think, that is in a even, okay, whether you're a conservative thinker or a liberal thinker or whatever, everybody acknowledges that there is such thing as modernity. Modernity has, you know, come
reality.
about and it's a reality that, like, it is a symptom of our recent civilizational reality. And so how do you
would you
parse
call that
that?
Atheistic?
Well, that's the other issue. It's like, how do you? It's, to me, it's like, you know, is the glass halfway empty or halfway full? You know what glasses you're looking through in order to, you know, assess the issue. What are you focusing on? And one of the things that we were discussing is that one of the things that we take for granted is that when we critique modernity, we tend to overlook the fact that modernity, at least as we understand it or as we experience it in Western civilization, is indebted to Christianity. And so we tend to think of it or discuss it as if it is an entity on its own. And I would say that, you know, it arises from issues of the tensions between gospel principles and the church and its interaction with culture. I was just reading, I think it's Florovsky, that, you know, he says that there is an antinomical, like there is an antinomy between church and culture, and there is, given that there is an eschatological dimension to the gospel, there is a component in which it sees its engagement with history and the world and culture as provisional or transitory, you know, and so there is, by definition, a critical, cautionary engagement with culture. Nevertheless, it has Christianity has also, the church has also played a major role in maintaining culture and transfiguring aspects of Hellenism, for example, and creating the groundwork that eventually leads up to the Renaissance, and then all the domino that falls up to the present moment. So there is both and.
Okay. Is this a fair statement? Modernity is culture untempered by orthodoxy.
No, because I think
no.
I would have to say that Christian, because we have to be careful with the term orthodoxy.
Yeah, because I want to say Christianity. That's
yes,
right. Okay,
exactly. Because it's like, we got to remember that, like, you know, prior to the Great Schism, it was all one Orthodox faith. And then even after the schism, how are we to parse out when the West, you know, further and further? It's like, you could say that there were different
Come on, man, let's
sectors.
do it. Let's do it. How about the Crusade?
You could say that there are different sectors within the Western, you know, empire, you know, or the the sphere of the Roman Catholic Church, that like, or the Roman See, or however you want to call it, that we're still within the mindset of orthodoxy, and some sectors were further away, and it wasn't as monolithic, and it wasn't as a dry cut kind of like phenomenon, historically speaking. But some historians say that, like, it took up to like the Fourth Crusade, for example, for there to actually have like for the mentalities to actually come to like a halt of an actual like division in psychologically, but it wasn't that simple. Anyways,
okay.
So that to say, getting back to your initial question, that there is I would prefer to say that you cannot divorce modernity from Christianity.
Okay. And when you say Christianity here, you're speaking of those things. They're connected, but they may be tattered in terms of theology that ekes out into culture,
or
and the theology is
distorted.
Okay, but the pure theology, let's just call it pure, of the church, because it's pure. Because if you're going to be Orthodox, you have to say the church is God's body on earth. So that thing called the church, wherever it is, and we can talk about that, it tempers and it influences society. And you're saying, and I think I'm saying, Western society has been less tethered to that, and yet it's tethered somehow. So how is it tethered? How is it even connected to what we call ancient Christianity? Or how about just call it Christianity? How is Western society even tethered when you have 350,000 million denominations?
Okay.
You got an AI being built by atheists. How is it tethered? Please help me.
Okay, listen. Okay, so let me. You're the
I
historian.
mean, God's president, right?
Yeah. You're the historian, so you're gonna have to fill in the blanks for me. I mean, I have the general.
We'll do it by art. Do it by painting.
Well, that's another thing. I mean, I'll get into that. But the thing is this: for example, we gripe against the Enlightenment, like we were talking, earlier.
I gripe a lot.
Right. But like the reality is that the Enlightenment is the fruit of a Christian critique of superstition. You could see the Enlightenment as partly being that, and also, okay, that's one. You could put that on the table. Okay. We gripe against individualism, but I would say that individualism is the distortion of the value of the human person in Christianity. Okay. We gripe against scientism, which goes along with the Enlightenment thing, but but you could say that our modern science comes partly from an inquiry into natural phenomena that is not given to the superstitions of magic and things like that. And so
God's creation being
God's creation value God's
is not a terrible thing.
So, or scientific inquiry, let's call it that. Okay.
Yeah, the method.
Like, for example, like our notion of historical development as compared to the pagan understanding of cyclical time, our notion of a telos in history. That, of course, you get exaggerations of interpreting that through a Hegelian kind of philosophy, but nevertheless, like the notion of history having a purpose and or having a beginning, middle, or end, and consequently the notion of progress, you could say, is a distortion of a Christian, understanding.
So the value, but you keep saying distortion.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is that finally, like another thing is the value of human freedom, and so the critique of I would say the critique of injustice, totalitarianism, the and basically the critique of brutality, and the pursuit of justice. All these things are in Western civilization is stamped by the Christian influence. It's like you can't, I mean, what we have is Western civilization is by now is basically a distortion of what initially was the impress of Christian values.
Is that what modernism is in art too? Like Kandinsky and these cats, these guys doing.
See, I have a soft spot for modern painters, and I try not to be dismissive completely about what has transpired in the development of Western art.
If people don't know, you're an iconography. I'll put it in the intro, but
yeah,
you're an iconographer of the church and quite a well-known one. So is it all part and parcel the same? You're describing in art what's happened in jurisprudence, what's happened in, I don't know, in education. It's all these Christian ideas sort of turned into little mini monsters because they go off the rail.
They're heresies, you could say, of Christian principles that have been exaggerated to the point of.
So what would you hold on to?
What was that?
Hold on to?
What
would you hold on to among the distortions? How can we make a union?
One of the things,
or a
for
peace
example, one clear example is, I value, in our case here in the United States, the freedom that we have as Orthodox Christians to worship the way we want to, without having been constrained by a state to either conform to their stipulations of how to or not to, and or to have to basically bow to the dictates of a church and state relationship that compromises my faith. And we like to romanticize what was taking place in the Byzantine Empire, but we know, if we're honest, that like a lot of the problems that arose in that situation was because the emperors wanted to get their way. They wanted to impose heresy, and in some cases, and we remember the saintly emperors, but we and then we glorify this like sort of like simplified version of the Byzantine Empire to exclude from our narrative all the abuses of the dynamic that occurred between the church and state situation. And so, but here in secularity, which we like to gripe about, we have the blessing of being able to worship in freedom. And so to me, it's like, it's like sometimes we get carried away in our romantic notions of the past, and we tend to want to, in a way, implement a utopic. We in our culture war, we inadvertently seem to be desiring to establish a kingdom on earth. And so what we have is this utopic desire to impose Christian values on everybody else, because we're sick and tired of the liberals who are running around dictating their own agenda of whatever kind of, distortion morally, economically, or whatever it is, or politically, whatever. And so then we fall into the trap of like actually engaging. It's like fighting fire with fire, engaging in the dynamic via the same kind of politically inclined or the politicization of orthodoxy, or turning orthodoxy into.
Chuck D?
Was that?
Remember Chuck D?
No,
do you remember Chuck D? Chuck D, the lead rapper in Public Enemy.
Yes. What do you say?
Haters taught hate. Now we're gang banging.
Yeah.
He was referring to slavery, but he was referring to the idea that the values of the slave master were inculcated in the slave, and those are values of power, and then power and dominance and authority, and those were inculcated and then applied within Black culture. And you're saying on some level we have to watch out not to take the culture war and the idea that one will reign over the other and then become oppressive in that. In other words, the hater taught hate. Now we're gang banging. We don't want to be gang banging.
Exactly. You got it. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And my fear is that sometimes, I have to be honest, conservative people just like to gripe. It's like, stop griping, man. It's like, how many blessings do you have in this day and age that is the fruit of the imprint of Christianity on our Western civilization that allows for the kind of discourse, for my opinion to be able to be expressed and your opinion to be able to be expressed, and for there to be debate, which is good, rather than a monolithic, follow, be the sheep, follow the ideology, be a good citizen, and in so doing, we will have heaven on earth. It's like, and go ahead.
Can culture exist in a state where the individual knows himself as free? Because isn't culture a common attentiveness to the highest things? I agree with you. Imposition of the highest things may or may not be good depending on how it's done, maybe. In other words, is total freedom actually even a thing, and is it good?
Right. I think that we have to differentiate between two notions. One, which is what we agree on as Christians, is that our ultimate freedom is union with God. It's deification. Being deified is how we become our true selves. But that doesn't take away the specificity of our historic individuality. We become transfigured in our participation with the divine nature, but that doesn't rob us from the memory of what we've experienced, who we are in the immediacy of our objective historical predicament. And so that's the beauty of it, So
you're not afraid of freedom?
No. I mean, I am afraid of freedom insofar as I'm afraid of foregoing the attachment that I have towards my passions. And so while my heart desires the divine union with God, part of me, there is a battle within me. Part of me wants to just cling to my earthly passions. And so there is a fear of ultimate freedom, because ultimate freedom means to be in conformity to the will of God. And that means that I have to forego my own self-will. See, so that
seems personal. Right.
Yeah, yes.
You're talking about levels and layers, because what you're saying you're afraid of is that doesn't apply in the same way to culture and to the layers of society outside of your own soul. Is that it feels like one thing.
It doesn't.
Does it just scale up?
It doesn't. But this leads me to the other notion of freedom.
Forgive me. Yeah.
No problem. This leads me to the other notion of freedom, because the secular notion of freedom is you do whatever you want. You could choose to do whatever you want, and doing whatever you want, whatever brings gratification, then that's the measure of your freedom. But that's not. Yeah, but then there is
that can't create culture.
Okay, that's another question, which we will get into the definition of culture. But because it's a very important one. But but there is a connection between what I just described, which, as you rightly pointed out, is a personal conversion struggle, an inner, dynamic of cooperation with God. Okay, and and the secular do what thou wilt, and to put it in the most crass level, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. That's like Aleister Crowley's like religion, right? Dilemma, right? So that's the satanic like notion of freedom, right? So but the reality is that both of these we're capable of engaging in either one of these things. They're predicated on one mystery, and that is being created in the image of God, which entails our freedom of will. You see? And I think one of the things that we have to remember is that while it is completely distorted in a secular society, the call for freedom or whatever, it is nevertheless, there is a kernel of truth in it, insofar as the Lord has, from the very beginning, given us freedom of will, and he has never trampled on it. And when he came to reveal himself and when he became incarnate, he invited us. He did not impose himself on us. And so you could say that while yes, it is distorted, and yes, it's individualistic, subjectivist, or whatever, however you want to call it. Hedonistic, exactly. Nevertheless, we cannot forget that while we do not condone that misuse of human freedom of will, we cannot presume to somehow trample on that freedom of will via a pietistic desire to impose our own human values on everybody else, via an ideological, like a making of orthodoxy an ideology, a political ideology. And
so folks out there who are listening, I just trampled on your free will by stepping on your words. But most of you will know, but if people are out there going like, why are these guys always talking about Dostoevsky? Okay, right here in the middle of this conversation, which is very cool, is the Grand Inquisitor's question. And so if you're wondering what this is, go read Dostoevsky if you haven't done it. Grand Inquisitor out of the Brothers Karamazov. And that's what we're into right now. And so my only thing is, though, Father, I get what you're saying. You let it roll out. People are free. Their will take them into things that should reveal to them their own wrongs and their sins. And that revelation is how God works. I'm like in total agreement with that. Is there no action then? Is there no imposition? Is that the freedom? Is that what saintliness looks like then? Is simply, is the action prayer? What happens next?
But the thing is that I think this is we're in the realm of principles, but you're calling us back to the realm of application, and I would say that I think that's where the rubber hits the road in a way, because there is never going to be a simple answer to that question, because the answer will always be an ambiguous answer. It's like, for example, war is of course an evil that we don't want to see ever happen, but inevitably it happens. And so then what am I supposed to do as a citizen? Am I supposed to just not protect my family, or you know what I'm saying, or protect my country. What does it mean? Like, so there is a question of justice, of like, how do we engage in a way with society in which, while we maintain Christian principles, we do not create chaos, or do not like forego an attempt to implement some kind of order that is just, that is humane, and that it is abiding by the principle of loving your neighbor as yourself. And so that sometimes means that you will have to inflict some degree of punishment in order for there to be some orderly dibbing out of justice. But the danger is when we want to turn justice into vengeance, or when we forego a sincere critique of our own country when it engages in war, because we think we are righteous in everything our country does, and we are unwilling to say, call it out for the evil that our country does.
Which
you know
is
what I'm saying?
which,
And so,
yeah, it does apply to the person. It's the same for a human soul. Is before they
yes.
go around pointing out everyone. Yeah, it does scale down in that sense and scale up. I get it. Yeah.
But the thing is that different people are called to do different things. And so I think that there is a role for Christians who have like a gift for political engagement, to engage in political discourse in order to promote Christian values. But they have to be careful as to how they engage in those debates, because, as I said before, there is a tendency, for example, in some sectors, of wanting to go back to like ultimately totalitarian political systems. Like they think, well, if we just go back to a monarchy that is autocratic, then all the problems that we have in the decadence of our Western civilization will go away, which is a simplistic romanticism, and they forget about all the abuses that comes out of that. And I'm not speaking in the abstract, because I know of of traditionalist groups that that have that kind of
Sure.
Simplistic ideology.
Okay, but you're a monk living in a monastery. So like, what do you think of the Amish? When you see the Amish, they're engaging.
I think they're good people. I'm not gonna judge them or criticize them, because they. I mean, you cannot.
Well, they're sort of giving a stiff arm. They're sort of deciding not to participate in some way because they've judged modernity as something like not worth mingling with.
But I think they I don't think that they're as monolithic in their attitude, meaning that like they gauge how a specific technological development has an effect on their community. And
like you guys in the monastery, similar.
Yeah, but we're not nearly like that, like inimical towards like technological. I mean, I'm using it
in terms of,
you know what I'm saying?
But in terms of strict choices.
Yeah, and you can't really compare these groups with Orthodox monasticism, because they arose in a completely different historical context, and their doctrine of community is not really what the monk has in mind as monasticism relates to the church at large, and its theology is completely different. And so then,
okay.
But what I would say is that I am not. And more, you should have asked what do you think about the Benedict option. That's what you should have asked.
Well,
you probably didn't want to ask it that way, because it would have been a little bit too dicey. But the thing is that
do it.
Well, the thing is, like, I don't agree with it, because it's like it's like the church has given us two ways. I mean, one is monasticism, and the other one is you work out your salvation via a family, and of course, I'm not I'm not saying that to become to appear to be invidious of like people who happen to just basically be in a predicament where they're single and they're not cut out for monasticism or a family life. That's a completely different, that's a different predicament that you can't judge. So, but I'm just saying in general terms, and so to create sort of like a commune alternative within orthodoxy to me is comical because um, because we have seen what comes out of communes in the 60s and 70s. You know what I'm saying? So it's like the fact that there are Christians that attempt the project is not going to necessarily make it any different per se. Who knows? You could give it a little bit longer of like a lifespan, but eventually it'll disintegrate. It's not the answer to the problem of how church engages with culture. And here we go back to the whole question of culture. What do we mean by culture? And why don't you tell me what you mean by culture?
Right. Well, before I do that, you're reminding me of, again, a phrase from the Supra, from the KP table in Georgia, which is the table is a symbol of order. The tamada invites eternal toasts or logos or words, and everyone is attentive. But they always have this toast to sort of the outside, things outside of the table, because there's this recognition that the things outside, they bear a type of chaos. They're chaotic. They're outside of the known world, which is that table, which is the known toast given by the figure of the priest, the tamada. And so they always toast in the outside, the chaos, because the chaos needs the order, the table, as much as the table needs the chaos. In other words, there should be an integration between let's just a Christian, whatever flavor, let's say an Orthodox Christian, and there should be an integration into the outside. Otherwise, it becomes too ordered. It becomes too stiff. The soul becomes too stiff, and in some ways, the community becomes too stiff. I happen to agree with you. I'm not inclined toward the Benedict option. One is because I think that culture is wrought from relationship. In other words, you have to struggle into the world in order to create beautiful relationships, because the relationships that are best are those that are forged through difficulty, like man and wife, like best friends for life. Those cats really went through a lot. And I feel like when people are doing that, they're actually building on something common, communal, right? Communitarian, and that allows for the birth of culture. And culture here is just shared highest values manifest in food, clothing. So I think culture demands integration and relationship, and I'm not afraid. I would much rather live in a city than with 5 Orthodox guys on a mountain.
Yeah.
Even if the city is filled with
right
heterodox. For my own soul, not because I prefer the mountains. I just know myself as better, as moving forward in that, as opposed to stultification. Now, it could just be an excuse. I don't know.
No, I think one of the things that I think what you bring up about this question also has to do with temperament. I mean, like, one of the reasons, like, monasticism is a voluntary thing. It's like, and not everybody like is cut out for it, and because they're not called for it. Just like not everybody's called out to be married, but there is room for different vocations within the church for a personal temperament to flourish and to have a direction in how they work out their salvation. And I think to create an artificial kind of like communality that is alternative to what the church already offers as its own community, of the faithful, and to sort of like create a pseudo monastic alternative. That's what I would call it for now. But
well, I get suspicious of the lack
yeah,
of hierarchy in that situation. Who's
right,
doing
and
what
also,
with whom, how?
and also, like you're saying, the ossification of the need for the porosity for there to exist for socialization. For example, children that are born in a situation like that, they're not going to be exposed to the realities of the challenges of living in a society that is diverse and complex, and that actually brings the opportunity for you to actually engage in working out your salvation in a way where it addresses your own passions in a way that is like real, is not in a synthetic bubble that you create in order to guard against ultimately things that you cannot guard against, because ultimately you cannot guard against the world that is ultimately your passions. Your, like St. Macarius says, your heart is both, a abyss that is, there are dragons there and there are angels, and St. Isaac the Syrian says that the world is the passions. And so you cannot somehow create walls that prevent you from dealing with the reality of ultimately the cultural tensions that exist in secularity, because these tensions are only a concretization of the human heart.
Mm-hmm.
And so, getting back to the whole question of culture, I think what we have is culture already. We might not like it. It might be fragmentary, which I agree. It isn't fragmentary. It is ugly in a lot of ways. It does not. It might not express our own values as Christians, but nevertheless, it
All
is.
right, I challenge you. All right,
It
let me
is.
challenge you.
Nevertheless, it is a culture. It is it's a cultural. It's the culture of secularity. It's a culture of consumerism. It's a culture of globalism.
Diffusion,
It's some
culture of
people call it liquid
disintegration.
modernity. It's like you say diffusion. It's like it's like, so it's, but it's still nevertheless, because culture to me, okay, it's basically the embodiment of the what is upheld by a given people, a given society.
I know,
And
but you
we
can't.
manifest those
What's the
things.
American culture? What is it?
Is
I don't
it
help me
Burger
out.
King, pop music,
Is it consumption? So
it is,
the
yeah,
highest value
consumption,
is
yeah,
free
consumption,
to
yes,
consume?
neoliberalism, like all these various things, like individualism, like that. I'm not saying we don't we don't we don't uphold that as part of our culture, right? As
But I see what you're
Christians,
saying.
but it's still part of the overall large,
I would I would argue as a
manifestation of what this
historian.
whole society is basically embodying and manifesting as part of his values.
Okay, as a history guy who studied history, master's degree, whatever, this is what I'd say. Yeah, the thing you're describing, there is a sort of set of neoliberal, I would call them postmodern principles, but the fundamental principle works against the notion of culture. And the fundamental principle is nihil, which is that my ability to find my life as without meaning is okay and fine. And as that takes over, I would argue that in history, you see that the culture dies. Whatever that thing was that was
Yes.
defined, it can't
Yes.
survive. And so, yeah, okay, I'll give you liquid modernity, and I'll give you like whatever not punk culture, but I'll give you.
Don't go too hard on the punk rock, man.
I know the punks are all right. I'm cool with that. No, I'm cool with that. I think it's the opposite actually of punk. Punk culture is trying to get out of liquid modernity.
It's in a way is a critique of the disingenuous,
Right.
middle class, hypocritical culture, but
Right.
but it also has a nihilism in it too. So it's like it's both and. But I think I agree with you. I don't disagree with you, John. I mean, but I think it's well, you could say that we some people have called it like we are in a time of decline. Is the decline of a civilization basically?
Do you bemoan that? you're a freedom lover. Let me ask you.
I don't bemoan it, because my kingdom is not of this world, like the Lord says, and we are as pilgrims in this land. And so, in a way, I bemoan the unfortunate predicament that souls find themselves in this situation of not having like faith, and or not finding meaning in the beautiful cosmos that the Lord has given us, and not having access, or having themselves being cut off, or like being confused in a situation where like they're muddled in their heart to the point where they seem not to have hope, or they enter into despair, or and so yes, I of course that is something to be concerned about. But in terms of culture as a thing in itself, culture shifts, changes, transforms. It could be transfigured. It could, it is an ongoing project of human creativity.
Do you get accused? Do you get accused? I've accused you. Do you get accused of not being fearful? That's not the right word. Of not being suspicious enough of, say, the modern things, especially the modern theologies? Like, are you properly nervous about the Catholic Pope?
I don't, you see, I take it for granted in a way, maybe in a naive way, that modernity is what it is. It is the complexity of multiplicity of beliefs. It's relativistic primarily, and it values individualism. It is it by now due to the I would say the helpful critique of postmodernism. It like the claims of objectivity and positivism and all that stuff have waned to some degree. Nevertheless, there is still a lot of, in popular minds, there's a lot of like, of a scientific kind of like orientation that is still prevails. You know what I'm saying? Although it has been critiqued by some aspects of postmodernism, but yes, I mean, I'm not unaware of all that, and I don't agree with it, but at the same time, to me, it's like, why should I be surprised about it? I mean, it's like by definition, like Christianity is always going to be a force of critique. It is always going to be like, in a way, not what everybody will embrace. And so by definition, and so and so to claim that there was ever a time when that existed is, to me, farcical. And
do you hate my podcast?
No, of course I don't, because it serves a specific purpose, which is what I just mentioned, which is the critique component, which is what like that is the one of the cultural values of Christianity, which is to basically become, what's the funny thing, I'm sure you've heard the saying, the pastor, when he goes up to preach, he comfort the despairing, and to bring discomfort to those who are too comfortable. You know what I'm saying?
Right, yeah. Right.
So that's what we are meant to do. I mean,
I think that's helpful. God willing, that's what's happening.
And so, but I think, in getting back to the whole art question that you mentioned before, like I tend to find it. I have been at times extremely critical of modern art. As I should be, and as there is a place for that. But at the same time, I think it could go overboard, where when we basically create a, as I said before, a formulaic narrative that claims to be definitive in the interpretation of what has occurred in modernity when it comes to art. And so then what we do is what we create system or a formula that is primarily from a conservative perspective is what tends to happen is the imposition of a liturgical art paradigm to a secular art paradigm. Mm-hmm. And by definition, everything will be, of course, it will appear monstrous according to the liturgical paradigm. It will always lack. It will always be a failure. It will always be ugly. It's like, so what's the point of doing something like that?
That's because of freedom, right? That's because of freedom. It's because the liturgical paradigm is grounded in freedom. In other words, Christ invites freely. The liturgy is offered freely. The icons are painted freely. And if you start to impose all that on secularism, literally by definition, you're rolling like the secularist at that point.
Yeah. And I have in more recent years become more reticent towards being excessively critical. And what I tend to do now is to judge in a case by case basis. There is the general features, so to speak, of what has taken place due to historical circumstances. People, emphasize different things. I mean, I don't know what gave rise to modernity. Different people have different interpretations. I mean, one of the things is the rise of the middle class. Okay, and the tensions between the middle class and the aristocracy, and then the revolutionary consequences of that. Then the Industrial Revolution is another thing. Okay. And the another component you could say is in the wake of scholasticism, nominalism, and the basically philosophical systems that became divorced from a theological understanding of reality, and so then the autonomy of philosophical inquiry, all that tied in together along with other ingredients.
I'm down.
Other ingredients in the batch, technology, the Industrial Revolution, and all this basically created the perfect formula to that led to the exaggeration or distortion and the heretical doctrines that gave rise to modernity. And along with that, romanticism as a critique of an enlightenment, and then you see a play that goes on in modernity between like the questioning of excessive rationalism and with the call for the individualistic, the value of the person and the imagination, and that gets played out in the development of modern art.
I think you're being generous. I think that modernism, like you said, the objectivists, that's Ayn Rand, those cats, but also positivism. I just think that modernity as a scientific, materialistic, atheistic movement, it has caused many, 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 many problems. And that's sort of what our podcast is about.
Yeah.
And I would say that within that Enlightenment time frame, there's some interplay back and forth. You see the utopian movements in Protestantism in the 1800s, right? But I would say that what we're in for now, what's coming now, is a giant reckoning as per all that positivism.
I don't deny that.
I'm not like,
yeah.
I'm not, and I don't know how to play with it within that. I'm not going to the, I'm not going to the Benedict option. What I'm trying to say though is you should expect some chaos.
Right. No, I don't deny the prospect of that being the case, but by the same token, I don't deny the pendulum swinging back into some kind of order, because you get ebb and flows. And whenever people say, it's the apocalypse, then the Messiah doesn't return. How many times have we seen that with like the Protestant sects? When
I
they're
think you're
like,
going to see pockets.
you know,
I think you're going to see pockets. I think Samuel Huntington, who wrote about this and then was just excoriated on the East Coast and all the academic, he was a theorist, political theorist. He wrote that there's like 7 cultures that exist, and each one sort of operates on its own. They're mostly the Hindu culture, the Christian culture, and each culture sort of, I think this is what we're facing right now is that the world's going to break apart, and then depending on where you are, what you're saying will play out. It'll be a more chaotic type of culture, and then there'll be a really, really controlling culture, and then there'll be one over here that's trying to find something in the middle, and they'll be at war generally.
right?
And
Yeah.
I think you're seeing that happen. Who knows if that's true, but this makes sense to me historically.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense, and I don't think that we as Christians should be freaked out about that. I mean, I think sometimes we get a little bit
Doesn't bother
overboard
me.
about it. What's that?
100%.
And
It doesn't bother me.
yeah,
But I think there's a force that's trying to quell all of what I just described, if it's true. I think there's a force, and that's the globalist force, which I do think among all the forces has the most colonial, controlling, and I would call it despotic inclinations, and that is a common culture for the whole world.
you know what's funny
And
about that
where
statement?
yeah, I want to hear.
I've been reading
What's funny?
the Maccabees, okay, and when you describe that the global despotic, you know what I'm saying? I'm thinking of the Roman Empire, man. I'm thinking about how the Roman Empire wanted to subsume the Jews into their own, or the Greeks. So after the fall of Alexander the Great, and then eventually like the five rulers, that reign over, and so then and then eventually the Roman Empire. But like you see in the book of the Maccabees, like this whole trajectory of history of like this world empire, which is sort of like in that ancient culture, like a globalism, so to speak, attempting to subsume the other local cultures into its own ideology, its own political system, and notion of the sacred. And the irony is that
of course.
was that.
Oh, go ahead.
But the irony about that is that our contemporary situation is parallels with that in a different way. Is I would say that our globalism, although some people might not agree, you could say is more humane because of the imprint of Christianity that has been like, you know what I'm saying? That, I find it ironic that like then people who are traditionalists, and I would say pseudo-traditionalists, because you got to make a distinction between holy tradition, which is the church's, teaching, and then pseudo-traditionalism, which is basically a political attempt to basically impose a romantic notion of the past. Okay, and so this traditionalist mentalities, like basically they think that like, oh, whether it is medieval culture or this like the pagan past that had more of a notion of the sacred, and then they whitewash like all the wrinkles of all that took place in these civilizations, and we forget that it was extremely brutal, and it was extremely like the human person did not factor. If you were a slave, right, you were completely owned by your master, and if your master said, "I want to get rid of you," I get rid of you. And so it's like, who are we kidding? And so they want a past that is more cruel than the globalism that we have now. So I'm not saying that to excuse the globalism that we have now, and it's like, as you said, the colonialism and all the injustices that is by default like introduces into the dynamic of of global political struggles and whatnot, and then the unfortunate like plight of people on the ground that get subsumed in it, and they suffer the consequences.
It feels like you're just, I don't know. When I read Orthodox history or Christian history in the East, it feels like you're saying what most of the good guys say, which is calm down. Culture shifts. Culture happens.
Mm-hmm.
Shifts happen. Orthodoxy is not of this world. It will inform the world to the degree that your heart is informed and your soul. And so let's move on. I like that. I like that. Now, our next talk, because I got to roll, but our next talk should probably be something. There are heterodox, though, that import something like a lot of this language into the conversation about who Christ is and what Christianity is and what the church is. They form a certain kind of challenge, these heterodox, because often they're very aligned with what you might call secular, I might call globalist, modernist. And I'm dying to hear what you have to say about that. I can't take it on right now, though. I literally gotta go.
All right, man. So
Are you mad?
I think
you want to do that. You want to take that on.
I think we touched on a lot of different things that I think eventually they need to be clarified to some degree and unpacked a little bit more.
This is my friend. This is you.
But,
I've never left a conversation with you. It could be on a bus in Harlem, me and you hanging out, where we didn't leave with you saying, yo, we got to clarify that. That's not quite there yet. And I love that. I'm going to be over your grave and you're going to be like, hold on. I got to clarify this. So, all right. We'll make it another day. This was good. This was a question about freedom and what things from the West do we retain. It was hot. It's hot stuff. Man.
Great talking to you, man. As always.
Well, that guy, he never wants for the big ideas. He is always driving those big ideas. Father Silouan Justiniano, dear friend of mine, and a painter extraordinaire, joined us on WAWTAR to talk about modernity. www.first-things.org. That's where you find ways to become a donor and then join us for regular monthly conversations. But most of all, join us for some really cool discounts on travel and all kinds of other things at First Things, and help people. We spend money responsibly. I can show you the numbers. People go and spend 2 years and do things that are difficult, and they meet people who are beautiful, who have great ideas, and we help them build their best projects in some of the world's most impoverished places. Come with us, join us, but most of all, consider a small donation each month to First Things Foundation. www.first-things.org. Until next time, peace out.